Welcome back, Warcraft Grognards. Today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I know that, like I just said, most of you here are probably Warcraft Grognards, but uh, perhaps that's not a really huge demographic, and something that I really do like to do on my channel, something that I really do like to do with my time and with my fiction, is just mashing things together, just mashing different settings together. Like you have seen, I hope you have seen, and if you haven't, go watch it right now. My videos on Warcraft Earth and how I mashed the real world history of Earth with the Warcraft universe. And if you have seen it, you know that I like to do this sort of stuff. And because the other game, like the main game that I'm actually playing these days, that I have been playing for a little while now, is something that probably wouldn't surprise most fantasy fans now, and that's Baldur's Gate 3. And as I was playing it with a friend, I was asking myself a question that I would like to answer today. What would the story of Baldur's Gate 3 look like if it happened in the Warcraft universe? Now, I am not going to transplant all the major actors into Azeroth. I am not going to replace the world itself with Azeroth. I am not going to replace the major characters from Baldur's Gate 3 with characters from World of Warcraft or Warcraft in general. But I am going to look at the planet of Toril and transplant it into the Warcraft universe and try to imagine what things would look like if that planet existed here and what would change in the story that we know from Baldur's Gate 3. If we are keeping the world as it is, we are keeping Toril and we are keeping the city of Baldur's Gate. Now we have to look at all the major actors, and we will look at them chronologically because of how all the story of Baldur's Gate 3 unfolds. The first thing we ought to remember is, in reality, the story that lies in the background of Baldur's Gate 3 begins over 100 years ago. We are not given an exact timeline of when it happened, but at the core of it lies the story of Ketheric Thorm, probably the best boss in the game, in both in terms of characterization, story, and in terms of combat. Ketheric Thorm started in the normal Baldur's Gate universe, started as a paladin of Selûne, the goddess of the moon of the Forgotten Realms setting. And transplanting that should be easy enough, because if he was a paladin of Selûne, he could, in this universe, he could simply be a worshipper of Elune. And this might be a little bit strange to some of you because the Elune represents the White Lady, the Moon of Azeroth. But we have seen actually in the setting, in the more recent expansions to the Warcraft setting, that Elune seems to be a more universal entity with worshippers across different worlds of the setting, such as the world of Faizandi, from which the first Night Warriors came. So we can have worshippers of Elune on another planet in the same universe, while Azeroth is off doing its own thing. Therefore, we can have Ketheric Thorm be a worshipper of Elune, and perhaps on this world there are paladins who worship Elune and not just priests. And I know we all wish Night Elves had paladins too. No, they don't. So in this universe, there are humans worshipping humans and half elves, as is the case of Ketheric Thorm, worshipping Elune and getting paladin powers out of her. He was a worshipper of Elune in this universe. But then, of course, a tragedy befalls him, and his wife dies, and being unable to deal with the grief, with the loss. In the normal universe, he turns to the goddess Shar, the dark goddess of loss and the sister of Selûne. And what does he turn to in this universe? Well, Elune does have a sister in an opposite realm, but that sister is the Winter Queen, and I'm not sure about you, but I cannot see the Winter Queen doing the things Shar does in this game. So we have to consider something. I have to consider something, that a concept that is really kind of unique to me, that I developed out of the canon of Warcraft, that is going to be very relevant here. Because what is a concept that in the real world is very closely associated with the moon, something that you think about a lot when the moon comes up? It's the dark side of the moon, because our moon on Earth constantly faces the Earth with the same side. So while the other side of the moon isn't constantly dark, we've come to call it the dark side of the moon because we can't see it normally. We've only seen it after spacecraft flew out there behind the moon. But we've come to call it, and it's come to mean a lot of things in our popular culture. So we have the concept of the dark side of the moon. So what if Elune has a dark side? What if Elune has like a sub aspect of her that is more vengeful, more vicious, that calls for more drastic measures? And we kind of have that concept in the canon lore now. That concept is the Night Warrior. So what if, bear with me for a second, what if the Night Warrior isn't just a type of Elune worship? What if the Night Warrior is a separate entity that Elune excised out of herself to make her, to cleanse herself of her darker sides, of her darker impulses, but that darker side remained a separate entity that yearned for reuniting with the proper Elune, and for perhaps taking over and making Elune as a whole more like herself. So while the Night Warrior empowers worshippers of Elune and enemies of Elune, the Night Warrior also isn't really a friend to Elune because it has its own ulterior motives. So what if Ketheric Thorm, after his tragedy, why do I have so much problems saying the word tragedy? After his tragedy befalls him, what if Ketheric Thorm converts to worshipping the Night Warrior, and he becomes the Night Warrior with the darkened eyes, with the vicious streak, with all the unique powers that Tyrande exhibited in the main canon, the main universe? And Ketheric Thorm becomes the Night Warrior, not the god Night Warrior, the goddess Night Warrior, but becomes that avatar similar to the Night Warrior that Tyrande has become. And that Night Warrior twists him, that turns him to the same things that we have seen him do in real Baldur's Gate 3. And without dwelling too long on this, eventually that worship of the Night Warrior causes his death, causes his fall, and causes the land itself to become cursed by the Night Warrior and to become the Shadowlands, not the those Shadowlands. Perhaps it's called something different in this universe to not cause that confusion. That these cursed lands, the shadow cursed lands, and the story remains roughly the same. The actors remain roughly the same, but now we can move on to the further parts. And the next really major player in this setting, in the events that lead up to Baldur's Gate 3, is of course Lord Enver Gortash, the younger man with a quick and easy smile, or so he says to his followers to fool them into following him. Now, what is the story of Enver Gortash? He gets bought by, according to his parents, a warlock. He gets bought by a warlock so that his parents can pay off their debts. That warlock, well, it is not officially confirmed. That warlock was speculated to be either that warlock is Raphael, the son of the archdevil Mephistopheles in the normal BG3 canon, or that warlock sold him to Raphael in turn. That's where we need to address certain cosmological issues, cosmological differences between the two settings, because there is no hell, strictly speaking, in the WarCraft universe. There are no 9 hells of Beator. There is no archdevil Mephistopheles. So, who the hell buys Gortash? Yeah, that is a very good question. And the simplest answer is that the demons of the Burning Legion and their influence are always spreading across the universe, and even on planets that haven't been invaded yet, there are demonic agents that are preparing the worlds, softening them up, and working on them to convert them to the Legion or to weaken those worlds so the demons can invade. And you know who is one of the most, maybe not one of the most famous demons, but one of the very famous demons in the setting that got really an undeserved fame, and that is the Dreadlord Mephistroth. Funny story about Mephistroth. I remember when years and years ago, back during like Wrath era, before we really knew much about all those Dreadlords, there was Mephistroth was listed as a horrifically powerful dreadlord, assumed to be in command of the Nath regime. It was in the WoW wiki. It is said that he was a horribly powerful dreadlord who was assumed to be in command of the Nath regime after the demises of Tichondrius and Anetheron. Well, in modern lore, turns out that neither of those have died, and they just returned to the Twisting Nether, which I really think Tichondrius should have stayed dead because of the unique circumstances of his death. And sure, Anetheron returned, so this claim of Mephistroth's fame was really undeserved, but still, he is a fairly major demon lord in the WarCraft setting, and he has a similar name. So I'm doing that because he has a similar name, alright? So Mephistroth is the key player here, and somebody related to Mephistroth, perhaps some agent of his or some lesser dreadlord. He is the Raphael of this universe who buys Gortash. And Gortash spends his formative years in hell and becomes the person we knew him to be. And eventually Gortash learns more about. Eventually, Gortash breaks out of Nathreza, because presumably he ends up being imprisoned on Nathreza in this timeline. He breaks out of Nathreza, returns to Toril, and starts his schemes. Now that Gortash is free, he starts his schemes again, and we have to consider the key part of his schemes in the canon universe, and that is the Crown of Karsus. In this universe, the Crown of Karsus, of course, doesn't exist. It doesn't really exist in the main canon of of Forgotten Realms either, really, because Larian had a great game, made a great game, but kind of screwed up on the continuity a little bit, and the way Karsus is presented and what Karsus did and what some characters in the game can later do. The way that is done, it doesn't really play well with the established canon of the events of the Karsus. But that is beside the point. We don't yet know what would the story of Karsus be in this timeline, in this universe, but assuming the crown of Karsus doesn't exist in this timeline, nevertheless, we do have an artifact in this universe very similar in power and scope to the crown of Karsus that Gortash could use in this universe. And that artifact is, of course, the Helmet of Domination. Now, here's two big problems with using the Helmet of Domination. Either it is on, it's really one major problem. Either it is located on Arthas's head or Bolvar's head, or it's cracked into pieces and destroyed. But we don't know really who Gortash is really serving. Because in the canon universe, he becomes a worshipper of Bane, the god of tyranny. So, what god, dark god of tyranny and domination, would be interested in taking the Helmet of Domination and giving it to someone else so that he can enhance his own power, so that he can enhance his own schemes? And that's right. That's Zoval. That's the jailer. And we are actually using the jailer for something. Which means that in this universe, the jailer sends Gortash to reclaim the Helmet of Domination from the usurper Bolvar for Dragon. And so this does end up crossing over with Azeroth. And this does end up perhaps changing the future established events of the Warcraft setting. Or maybe he would fail at it, but let's assume he doesn't fail because we want to continue the story into Baldur's Gate 3. So, assuming that Gortash eventually makes his way to Azeroth, he makes his way to Icecrown, and he manages to take the Helmet of Domination from Bolvar, but instead of putting it on himself, of course, he brings it back to Toril. And once the helmet is there, he puts it on what exactly? We don't really have mind flayers or elder brains in the Warcraft universe, but we do have something very similar. We do have Faceless Ones and Kathir and their masters, the old gods. So what if the Nether Brain, the Elder Brain that was the main real villain of Baldur's Gate 3, what if in this universe, instead of perhaps not being even called an Elder Brain or Nether Brain, perhaps what if this is simply an old god that was buried in Toril under the Moonrise Towers? Uses this helmet to dominate the old god under Moonrise Towers and begins his plans. But between these two, we are lacking, like I've almost spoiled it, we are lacking the third major player. The player that is known to us only as the Dark Urge. The Dark Urge in the canon universe is a Baalspawn. He is a child of Baal, the god of murder. Now, what do we really with Baal in this universe? Because we already have Zoval with a very similar name, but Zoval isn't really into murder, strictly speaking. So we have to replace Baal with something. Or do we? See, there are a great many realms of the Shadowlands, and there are great many unseen realms, unseen entities that would rule over those realms, and where people with different inclinations and people with different people who live their lives differently would end up. So what if there is a realm of murder somewhere in the Shadowlands, a realm where the most consummate, the most vile murderers go? And what if it is ruled by a lord of murder who is very similar to Baal in names and powers, and perhaps we can just call him Baal for the lack of a better name? So what if Baal, this Baal, joins the jailer's scheme to use the helmet of domination to control the old gods and control their powers to take over the universe? What if there is a third, also an either also unseen god of death, or perhaps one of the Margraves of Maldraxxus, perhaps the Margrave Sindane of Maldraxxus, perhaps as spurred on by Kel'Thuzad as she was in the main universe, perhaps she becomes the Merkel of this universe, and she resurrects Ketheric Thorm and resurrects his daughter to gain his loyalty. And now we have our own dead three gods of death who now command their three chosen on Toril, and we have an equivalent of the Crown of Karsus, an equivalent of the Nether Brain, and now everything can fall back into place. So in the end, we can really set up everything almost exactly as it happened in the original universe. We can set things up like that, but what really happens after that? I will not go into all the details of how would the Emperor's story differ in this universe, and let's not go into how he's supposedly Baldur, because that's a whole other can of worms to open, which I one change that I really don't like in what Larian did in Baldur's Gate 3. But let's say the story with the Emperor happens in the same way. Let's say the story with there are no Githyanki really to have a relic, an artifact that could protect you from the helmet of domination, from its dominating power. But so sorry, no frog waifu for you. But we do have other artifacts, and while this is the strange thing about Shadowlands, they decided to reforge the Helmet of Domination into a new artifact they called the Crown of Will. While there was already a Crown of Will in the lore, in Alterac, the ancient unexplained crown that Mugthol put on him to free him from Sylvanas' domination. And while this crown isn't probably powerful enough to challenge the Helmet of Domination on its own, really, perhaps it can give the people who stumble onto this whole scheme enough of a freedom, enough time to break free of that control. And perhaps the Emperor, being some kind of Kathir or Faceless One, who perhaps he can just wear this crown on his head, hidden inside the astral prism, and he can use that to keep the people there free. But how does that even get there? How does the crown of will from Alterac even get to Toril? Because the answer to this is, remember how the Helmet of Domination got there in the first place. Gortash stole it from Baldur for Dragon, the Lich King, which means that the champions of Azeroth and all the forces of Azeroth now know there's someone from another planet there who stole the power of the Lich King. So of course they are not going to just let it go. And they eventually manage to find their way to Toril, and there begins Warcraft's newest expansion. There begins World of Warcraft Baldur's Gate. And that is probably the craziest thing I said on this channel yet. Eventually the Crown of Will from Alterac makes its way to Toril and is used to free a group of people. And probably it's just, the raiders, the nameless heroes of Azeroth who help defeat Gortash, and the Chosen Three who get their separate raids. Imagine Moonrise Towers as a WoW raid. Imagine Zurel being a boss, a raid boss of her own, or Ketheric having Ketheric Thorm having three separate raid encounters. First encounter on top of the towers, the second encounter in his second encounter in the Lithid colony, and then finally the third encounter being the avatar of not Merkel in this case, but perhaps Margrave Sindane, who comes to avenge her chosen in some way. Or imagine the Temple of Baal under Baldur's Gate 3 as being a WoW raid, with Oren as the Slayer of Baal as her own raid boss. And it's a crazy idea to consider, to reimagine the setting from Baldur's Gate 3 as how it would play out in WoW. But that is probably the most likely ending for this story if it happened in this universe, because different universes deal with their villains differently. While Toril and Forgotten Realms normally deal with their problems by just a small group of intrepid adventurers who get tied to all of those events individually, who rise up and take down every villain separately. In the Warcraft universe, if Toril ends up in the Warcraft universe, it starts playing by its rules. So Gortash isn't taken down by a small group of people who just come up to his tower and say, okay, we're not playing your games, and just attack him and kill him. No, there is a big massive raid in the Worm's Rock fortress, as it becomes a massive raid where you face against Gortash, and after defeating him, after losing the last point of control over the Helmet of Domination, the Elder Brain, the Nether Brain, or the Old God under Baldur's Gate 3 erupts, and the upper city becomes the final raid of the expansion. Because that's how World of Warcraft, how Warcraft universe deals with its problems. So in the end, we have recreated mostly the setup to the story of Baldur's Gate 3, but it quickly got derailed when we had to actually deal with the problems that arose. And perhaps that Crown of Will is not even necessary at all. Perhaps the Emperor isn't necessary at all to this story because of how things change between the different universes. And in the end, the villains are defeated the same as always. But perhaps we lose the Dark Urge, or perhaps he becomes our ally, one of these NPCs that tag along with you in World of Warcraft, like Therin Lothar. Perhaps the Dark Urge just hangs around with you, and follows you around to help defeat Gortash once he is taken amnesiac, and when he is later reclaims his memory and realizes that he was a bad person. And because it's World of Warcraft, that story only goes one way, and you don't really have a lot of story options in there to decide. So, perhaps Baldur's Gate 3 being the way it is, being in the Forgotten Realms universe, perhaps it's for the best. Perhaps it makes for a much better story. But nevertheless, it was certainly an interesting exercise to reimagine some of the key elements of a Abir Toril in this universe. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and do all the YouTube things. And yeah, you may have noticed that I have been putting out much fewer videos lately. They've become much less frequent. There are many reasons for it. One of the reasons is, of course, that I'm more busy than earlier. Another reason is simply that I am fighting a little bit of a writer's block when it comes to the videos, because everything I tried putting out, nothing I tried putting out was really getting a lot of views, and when you don't get those views, when you get like 50 views on a video that took you like 3 hours to make, when you get like 50 or 100 views, it's really demotivating to make more, and I don't really know what else I can do to make it more popular. And perhaps it's just the whole topic I ended up devoting the whole channel to. Perhaps the whole topic is just too narrow, and perhaps I've just hit an absolute peak of people who would be interested in the topic, and it's not going to get above those like 300 subscribers. Perhaps it's just never going to happen, because there aren't more than 300 people interested in it. And maybe there are a little more people who would be interested in it, but perhaps it just hit the absolute peak of it, and I don't know. So it is demotivating, and I am fighting some of the other video ideas I had, who are struggling a little bit to put them out, to really put them together. But if you do like this channel, if you do like what I'm doing here, please don't forget to like and subscribe, but tell other people, send it to other people who might be interested in this topic. Maybe we can find like a 50 more people who still haven't heard of this video. Maybe we can find the rest of them. So do try to spread it around if you can, if you liked these videos. But meanwhile, I will be ending this now. So I hope to see you next time, whenever that happens.